Our second scripture today is from the book of Genesis, chapter 45, verses 3 to 11, and then 15. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me," and they came closer. "I'm your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will neither be plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty.' And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that his brothers talked with him." Every now and again, you see a cartoon and it sticks with you. There's one that I saw years and years ago, and I still carry it with me. It's one of my favorites of all time. And it was of a convention of this huge arena, and there above the stage was a sign that said, "Convention of adult children of fully functional families." And then you looked out into the arena, and there are tens of thousands of seats, tens of thousands of empty seats, with 10 people maybe scattered through the arena, none of them sitting together. And I still remember doing exactly what you did when I saw that. First I laughed, and then I sighed. And realized I'd be pretty hard-pressed to come up with anyone I knew who grew up in a fully functional family. And if I were to ask someone, or someone in the listening audience of this sermon, someone out there in YouTube land were to respond and say, "I grew up in a fully functional family," my only response would be, "Really? Really? Really?" As much as I'd like to say that my children grew up in a fully functional family, if I were to tell you that, you would go, "Really? Really?" It's relative, isn't it? I mean, fully functional is one thing, but relatively functional, I think we did okay. But you'd have to ask Alexis or John about that, and better yet, ask Christian or Monique. And they could tell you the truth. There is dysfunction, and then there is dysfunction, isn't there? And we've all seen some of both. Some of both. But I don't know that I've ever run into a dysfunctional family that had anything on Joseph's family. You probably remember parts of the story from Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But just to kind of remind you of what happened here, as a boy, Joseph was his father's favorite. Now, it was a big family. There were, I think, 12 brothers, and Joseph was number 11. That's pretty far down in the pecking order in a society where birth order was really important. Really important. But for whatever reason, at the earliest times, Joseph was his father's favorite. And he knew it. And so did everybody else. And he didn't realize that that was a bad thing. He was clueless about it. And his older brothers, every single one of them, resented him for it, especially when you get to the top of the pecking order. But Joseph was clueless. He saw the world through rose-colored glasses that had been formed by his father's favoritism, and he couldn't imagine that everybody else didn't see the situation and him as his father did. And so he has a dream. One of many dreams. But in this dream, all of his older brothers bow down before him. And Joseph, with his rose-colored glasses, thinks, isn't that cool? All of my brothers just bow down before me. They're going to be so excited to hear this. And he tells them. He tells them. They all know how special I am, right? Won't they be excited to know about my ascendancy, that I will be able to go over and above everything in our society? Birth order, pfft, I'm going to be at the top, and they're going to be just so proud of me. He didn't get it. They did. He had finally pushed them further than they were willing to go. They were angry. They were jealous. Maybe they were even a little afraid that this dream might come true. And so the older brothers, they go and they make a plan. Tomorrow, out to the desert. We'll kill him. We'll leave him out there. The animals will eat the body. Tell Father, we don't know what happened. We don't know what happened. And they begin with just that plan. They take Joseph out in the desert with the plans to kill him, and Reuben starts to feel a little, guys, I don't know that I can kill my brother. I can leave him in the desert. I mean, the same thing's going to happen. I just that I don't have to do it. And so Reuben finally convinces his brother they're not going to actively kill him, they're just going to passively do it. So they go out and they find a hole, and into the hole goes Joseph. He thinks it's a game. They leave, knowing this is the desert. The longest he's going to last is if he dehydrates and dies from that. There's that possibility. There's also the possibility that some hyenas or a lion or a bear or some vultures are going to smell his distress from miles away and come and think, easy dinner. And here's Joseph in the hole saying, hey guys, it's not funny anymore. Come get me. Guys! And of course, they've long since left. And the story tells us that a caravan is passing by, and sure enough, they hear Joseph yelling in the hole, hey guys! Come get me! It's not funny! And they do come and get him. They're not much different than the animals. They look at this guy in the hole and they think, free meal. They put him in ropes and they carry him off to Egypt, where they sell him into slavery. Joseph didn't understand his brother's hatred. He didn't understand it. And he didn't understand the dysfunction in his family that he so missed because he had those rose-colored glasses that he wore every minute of every day, formed by his father's favoritism. Well, the story goes on, and we see that Joseph at the very least, earned some of that favoritism. He was a really capable guy. He goes into Egypt as a slave and works his way up the system until he's right at the top of the heap, one of Pharaoh's primary bureaucrats. Now, he's still a slave, don't get it wrong. But he's got real responsibility in Egypt. And the story goes that he has another dream that he shares with Pharaoh. And in the second dream, there are 7 fat cows. And then there are 7 sick cows. And he says to Pharaoh, this means that we're going to have 7 years where we're going to have amazing harvests. And then there's going to be a drought. And the only way to live through the drought is to save during those 7 years. Let's not act like things are crazy. But if we save it, we're going to have enough, and everything's going to be good. And Pharaoh believes him and does just what he says. And so the famine comes. And it hits Egypt, but it also hits Israel. And Joseph's family are suffering. Indeed, they're looking at their lives and they're realizing that one by one their animals are dying. The crops have all long since died. It's not going to be too long before they starve to death. But they hear there's food in Egypt. And Dad says, you guys go to Egypt. See if you can get some food for us. Because if you can't, we're going to die. So the older brothers all go and they leave the youngest, Benjamin, who has become Dad's favorite after Joseph disappeared. And they go off to Egypt. And they hear there from the bureaucrat that, well, yeah, we got some food, but I understand you have a younger brother. You gotta bring him back. I want to see him before I make any decisions. And by the way, when you leave, we're gonna leave a hostage behind, just to make sure you come back with the younger brother. Well, the older brothers, they're starting to think, yeah, something's a little squirrely here. And the dysfunction continues. They head back, and they leave the brother as a hostage, and they decide, you know what? We didn't really like him very much either. So we'll just leave him there, and we'll go home. And the famine continues, and the animals are dying, and Dad's looking at this and he's saying, you know, guys, this is really getting bad. You have to go back to Egypt and see if you can get some food, because if not, we're all going to die. And they talk and they say, well, if we could do that, we got to take Benjamin back with us, and who knows what's going to happen, because we know there's something squirrely going on there. But finally, they do just that. They get there, and that's where today's scripture passage begins. They're begging, bowing before this Egyptian bureaucrat who then says, hey, you know, you guys know who I am, right? I'm your brother. I'm the one you left in the desert to die. I'm the one you left in the desert who didn't die, but instead got picked up by Midianites and taken to Egypt and sold as a slave. I'm the brother that you poured all of your family dysfunction on. Now, you might have felt a little guilt, maybe, I don't know. But here we are now. Here we are now. Imagine the danger of this situation as those brothers sat there and looked at this Egyptian bureaucrat in all of his finery. The one they assumed they had killed for all of the years in between. The one who knew what they had done and likely had had all of those years in their minds to plot revenge, to make plans of what I will do to those guys if I ever get the chance. And they just walked right into it. They just walked right into it. I have every right to be vengeful. The brothers knew what they would do in his position. Heck, they tried to kill him just for having a silly dream. They knew if I was in his position, they'd all be dead. blink. The only question is whether I throw them into slavery first, I just kill them right now, or I send them back home without any food. I've got lots of options. They knew what they would do. They were all there having experienced their worst possible nightmares. Joseph had been betrayed by his brothers. He'd been carried into a foreign land. He'd been sold into slavery. And they thought they had killed him. The brothers, well, Joseph's dream had come true. There they were, kneeling before him. But the nightmare started before that. They had witnessed the grief of their father. They had faced starvation. They had begged for help from a foreign bureaucrat, only to discover their lives were in the hands of the one they tried to kill. The one person in the world who most had reason to want them dead. And in the midst of all of that, grace happens. Joseph says that God planned for it all to happen. Now, I'm not going to go there. I think Joseph's interpretation pushes the event a little further, perhaps, than it needed to go. And we need to remember that that's Joseph's interpretation of what happened. You can do with it whatever you want at that point. But regardless of whether it was God's plan that Joseph's brothers be so dysfunctional and they try to have him killed, or that they were so dysfunctional and tried to have him killed, and God went, oh, this is fun, now I can fix this. Whatever the case is, God uses this situation to do something wonderful. Whatever led to this, grace happens. God is at work even in the nightmares. And something good comes from this horrible, horrible situation. It is a completely unbelievable story. If someone went down to Hollywood with this as a screenplay and says, I got a story for you, how about this? They go, come on. That's just ridiculous. No one would believe that. No one could identify with that. Just go away. Go away. Because we haven't ever experienced anything quite that dysfunctional, quite that crazy, quite that filled with grace. But indeed, if we read it a little less literally, it does begin to resonate, doesn't it? Because we have all experienced times in our lives when things went out of control and went horribly wrong, and there was nothing we could do to fix it. We've all experienced those moments when our lives were out of control, and whoever or whatever had our lives in its hands didn't seem to really be concerned about our welfare. We have all had those times when the people whom we loved have let us down, or worse, have broken our hearts. We've all experienced all of those things. But the good news here is that even in those most horrible of circumstances, grace happens. When everything seems to be falling apart, grace happens. When those whom we love betray us and hurt us, grace happens. When others seek to use us for their own ends, grace happens. When we cannot understand why things have gone the way they have gone, grace happens. When others depend on us for the most important bits of their lives and we just don't feel like we're able to take care of it, grace happens. Grace happens. But I saw something a little differently this year as I read this passage. And here's what I saw. Grace happens, but it's not dependent on God. Grace happens, but it's not dependent on God. Grace happens, and it's dependent on Joseph. Joseph allows the grace of God to flow through this situation when he forgives his brothers. Because he forgives, they literally do not starve. Because he forgives, he is reunited with his father and his younger brother, and this dysfunctional family has the opportunity to at least become partially functional. Because he forgives, grace happens. Because Joseph does something really good, God can do something really good. Now, it's true, we don't know what would have happened if Joseph had looked at his brothers and said, "Off with their heads!" We don't know if God had a contingency plan of how to make this whole situation work out in a positive way. We don't know if there was something else that God had in mind. We can imagine that if Joseph had not forgiven his brothers, how badly things would have gone for them. It wouldn't be hard to imagine, but we don't have to do that because Joseph did the unimaginable. He forgave his brothers. He forgave his brothers. And God used those terrible circumstances to make something good happen. Now, I'm guessing that none of us have experienced anything nearly as horrible as what Joseph had experienced, but we have all been hurt by those who loved us. We all have experienced bad things. Sometimes big ones, as big as a spouse betraying. Sometimes as small as someone cutting in front of you on the highway. Maybe it even happened on the way to church. But in every instance, in every single one of those instances, we have the opportunity to forgive. We have the opportunity to forgive. And it happens multiple times every day. Again, sometimes really, really small, sometimes really, really big. Sometimes easy, sometimes not so easy. But the opportunity is always there. And when we forgive, grace happens. Now again, it's likely not as earth-shattering as when Joseph forgave his brothers and kept this whole family line alive and likely changed the whole script of our Bible and our faith. If Joseph had killed all of his brothers, everything would have been different. The Bible story would be different than the one we read. So it's not likely to make that much difference, but who knows? We'll never see it in many of the instances. We'll never see it. But sometimes even those smallest of offerings of forgiveness can make a huge difference in someone's life. Sometimes they can. And so the story of Joseph here is not of an amazing Technicolor dreamcoat. The story here is of courage to forgive, of courage to let go of the hurt and the pain, of courage to do the good thing, and then to watch as miracles happen.